Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch and are still nice and awake now. Um, Thank you to RBFF for inviting me to come speak with you all. This is my first time here, and it's been a great day of session so far, so I'm very proud to be in that company. Just from a show of hands, how many of you guys are currently engaging with either anglers or boaters through text messages right now? Okay, I see a couple. It's kind of hard to see actually out here. This is going to be focused on our efforts to specifically reach boaters in Texas to encourage them to renew their boat registration. And just as a caveat, we have had some previous efforts. In 2023, actually, we were lucky to have received a grant from our BFF, and in that specific campaign, we were focused on reaching anglers and encouraging them to renew their year from purchase fishing license. We had used some text messaging in the past, but this was the first time we did so for an actual campaign focused on license renewals. And we saw a very robust set of results from it. We delivered over 400,000 text messages to anglers and generated over 25,000 link clicks, which in turn earned us over $184,000 in revenue. So it was an ROI of like 1,700%, which was insane for us. And it really showed us that overall, our customers and constituents were really receptive to text messages. So we wanted to continue that learning and carry that on to this year's campaigns. So with this year's effort, which is also generously funded through an RBFF R3 state grant, our main objective was to increase renewals among lapsed boat registrations in Texas. And also, as a two-prong approach, we wanted to make sure that we could have boat owners verify and update their addresses through our text messaging efforts. And then secondly, we wanted to reach the owners of over 567,000 boats in Texas with our messages a minimum 1 to 2 times. And as you'll see, we sent over 606,000 text messages through this effort. So our tactics was pretty straightforward in this campaign. It was, again, a combination of not only text messages, but email communications, and it was sent at the time of expiration, followed by reminders at the 30, 60, and 90-day intervals. And our team would send us text messages first, and then a couple of hours later, those people would then get an email reminder that their registration was expired. So for the text message, which is the main component of the campaign, we utilized custom Matomo links, which was actually new to us. Matomo is pretty much like a competitor to Google Analytics. And so we utilized unique UTMs for each of the text messages that we sent. Texts were sent on or around the 17th of the month following that expiration. And again, with reminder text to renew the boat registration at the beginning of the month for the 30, 60, and 90-day reminders. And I'll just read through some of the examples of the text messages, starting with the one on the left. We wanted to make sure it was clear that it was coming from Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, so we would start the text messages saying that from Texas Parks and Wildlife Department or from TPWD, the acronym. And then your boat registration expires on February 28th, renew at, and then it was like a pretty URL or friendly URL that was clear as to, for us, for reporting purposes, whether it was what month and whether it was a 90-day or 30-day. And then at the end, we would make sure to conclude it with reply stop to end. So again, giving the consumer an opportunity to discontinue receiving text messages from us. And then the one in the middle, that was for one of the efforts that we had that was focused on updating our records. So making sure that the person's mailing address was correct. And again, the URL was clear. It was clear that it was from TPWD, and there was an opportunity to stop receiving text messages from us. And then the third one is just another example of one of the monthly reminder texts that were sent out. All right, and then in terms of the expiration email, this is an example. The left is the first part, and then the right side is that second part of the email. Again, with a big image at the beginning, encouraging people to get back on the water, notifying them that their boat registration had expired, and reminding them that boaters in Texas can enjoy so many, great aquatic resources from lakes, rivers, streams, and coastal access. Having a big call to action to encourage them to renew today. And then on the right, you'll see the different ways that they could renew the registration. One being, renewing online, which is probably the most easy, but then some people also prefer to instead renew by mail, and we would give instructions on how to go about doing that. And then lastly, renewing in person at a Parks and Wildlife, law enforcement, or participating tax assessor collector's office. And then finally, the email would populate with the boat information, the make, the length, the model, and then what that renewal fee looked like for that specific person. All right, and then going into the results, so as I mentioned earlier, we delivered over 606,000 text messages through this effort, which generated over 185,000 link clicks and an estimated $135,000 in revenue. And again, I'll go into a little bit more in the next slide, but the revenue was based on an estimated $50 per registration per person. And that is calculated again by the number of conversions, which we had about 2,700 conversions at a cost of $6,600 for an estimated ROI of 1,933%. So very similar to the effort that we saw with the YFP effort the previous year. And so we were really excited about the results that we saw with this year's campaign. So I won't go into all the detail here, but this is a more expanded view of all of the different text messages that we sent out throughout the campaign. So for that first line item, as you'll see, there aren't any conversions assigned to it, and that's because the full Matomo tracking hadn't been put in place yet. And then in August, we finally jumped that hurdle or got over that hurdle, and I'll go into more detail on that in some of the following slides. But we finally started seeing conversions throughout all of the subsequent months of the boat registration emails. And as you'll see too, the number of emails that we sent each month were anywhere from like 13 to 20-something thousand each month. And that was based off of the number of people that were expiring. But then at the end of the campaign, we also sent an effort to make sure, we sent text messages to make sure that we were encouraging people to renew their addresses and update their address on file. And those were a lot more. As you can see, close to 500,000 from those efforts alone. And that was after we were in communication with RBFF and making sure that we were clear to expand the effort beyond only getting people to renew their registration, but also to make sure that we had accurate records on file, which obviously is useful in the long term. And some of the observations that we had from the campaign were that customers were receptive to text messaging. From a number of 606,000 text messages that were sent, we got very few complaints from people, maybe like a handful. And that is to be expected in any time you reach out to someone in a new fashion. But we did notice that the multiple reminders did increase the sales that we got from the registration renewals and reduce the lag time between those renewals. And then thirdly, modernizing our messaging to consumers and customers rather was well received and was effective at generating revenue, which was a new kind of format for us to make sure people were renewing their registrations. And then lastly, simple to the point messages were the most effective. As you saw in the previous slides, having that clear, notification at the beginning of who the text message is coming from, what you want the person to do with a clear link of where you're driving them to, and giving them an option to opt out of text messaging is very important. I think in a previous session, they talked about the Can't Spam Act and the legalities of that. So the entire effort was reviewed by our legal team beforehand to make sure that we were in compliance with all of those measures, because that's obviously really important. All right, and then so we did have some challenges for the campaign. I would love to say that everything was perfect and ran smoothly, but that just was not the case. As some of our best intentions are, we inevitably, run into some roadblocks. So the first one was really just estimating the cost that we're going to go into the campaign effort. When we went about applying for the grant from RBFF, we had taken into account the number of boats for the state and used that as our estimate to calculate the cost of what we were applying for, not really taking into account that the campaign was going to be a much shortened length of time, and so we weren't going to have access to expiring boat registrations for the whole year. Secondly, we had one specific cost per text message when we submitted the proposal, and then throughout the campaign, we actually went through the process of renewing our contract with our text message and email provider, and that actually drove the cost down. So we went from about 2.5 cents per text message to about 1 cent per text message, which also further affected our ability to be able to utilize the full grant amount, because obviously in that case we would have had to have doubled the amount of text messages that we had estimated initially. So we worked to increase the frequency and the types of messaging to kind of combat that a little bit. We received approval in September to, as I mentioned earlier, message boaters about verifying and updating their mailing address. And so that was an important piece to help us utilize some of the funding. And then secondly, we had, as I also mentioned earlier, a late start to the campaign. And that was mostly because of internal IT issues with the tracking capabilities that caused a delay in our ability to start the campaign. So the system that people go to update their registrations wasn't fully tagged in the way that we needed it to be to measure conversions. And when we kind of brought that up and put in our requests with the web team to get that tagged appropriately, we were told that it wasn't going to be until 2026 that they were going to be able to do that, which obviously wasn't going to work for our shortened, time frame that we had to run the campaign. And so we had to kind of escalate that to leadership. We worked with our BFF as well, our own leadership, and we were able to escalate that in a way that we were able to get it implemented in a few weeks instead. So it just goes to show that, if you want it bad enough, you can push through and get things done quicker. Then sometimes the red tape might make you think something is going to take. Let me see, make sure that I went to, yeah. And so then we were able to get the tracking done and implemented in August. And so from August through the end of the calendar year, we were able to see conversions, and which I think is an important piece of the puzzle when you're going after, either license sales or registration renewals, is making sure you see that piece of information, and then using the average order amount to estimate the revenue and thus have like a picture of an ROI. And yeah, I think that concludes the presentation. My contact information is on the screen in case you guys want to reach out to me about the campaign. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer that now. Yeah. Yeah, we were actually given guidance about that because we had utilized Bitly in the past, but our web team kind of pushed us away from doing that because it's not as transparent, the link that you're clicking on, what it is, because Bitly, it's just a Bitly and then like a series of numbers. So to be as transparent as possible, we would recommend having a URL, even if it's a little bit longer, that shows that it's from your agency. So that's the guidance that we received and what we went with.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Quick question, and I apologize if I missed this, but what was the technology that you used to actually send out the text messages? And I'm also curious how you gathered cell phone numbers.
So the technology was through our provider that we use as well for emails, which was GovDelivery, which I believe they work with some other state agencies. Their parent company is Carasoft. So the functionality is pretty, I would say, limited in what you can see within the platform, but it does allow you to send out those text messages, and you have that ability to scrub lists of people that don't want to be reached out to. And in terms of where we got the phone numbers, when you sign up for your registration, you need to provide a phone number. And so we already had that database of numbers. We did run into the issue that some people might also run into with emails, that some people just give like a fake phone number or a fake email address. So I think from the small sampling of people that actually complained about receiving a text message this is more anecdotal, but was most likely someone's incorrect phone number. And that's kind of hard to, weed out, because someone can give you any phone number or any email address. And, but for the most part, people are pretty truthful when they're signing up for like a government-related, registration.
How did you handle the opt-ins if you were texting them from a list that you got? Because we have to do like two-factor authentication for them to opt in, and then they have to confirm that they've opted in to receive texts legally?
Well, from what we were told from our legal team was that because we already had a pre-existing, business relationship with those people, because they had signed up to have a registration of their vessel in the state, and we weren't really selling anything to them. It was just getting them to renew the registration. that we didn't have to do a two-step process for that. Yes. Yes, exactly.
Was there any particular reason you chose that analytical tool versus Google Analytics?
So, from my understanding, and this is from the web team, I believe we were able to house the information in-house as opposed to have Google house all the information for us. And from my understanding was that with the move to, I believe, G4, or GA4, was that Google was using kind of like a probabilistic determination of their web visits. And so it was, for example, they would use like a sample and then project from there like what web visits were, and not 100% accurate. And from our understanding, Matomo didn't do that. It was actual full sessions and website visits. And so that's why the web team decided to go with Matomo instead. Thank you, guys.